Welcome to the Many Adventures of Peter and Fee, Volume 1, Homecoming, by Kelvin Fernandez. Peter and Fee has budding communities across Reddit, Discord, Goodreads, Twitter, Facebook, and more, so I encourage you to seek out your comfort zone, join the conversation, and let me know what you thought of each chapter as you get through them. Since the series has just begun, the communities are small, so there's a good chance I will personally respond and we can have a discussion. I hope you enjoy listening to the adventures just as much as I enjoyed creating them. So without further ado, let's start the journey. The Many Adventures of Peter and Fee, Volume 1, Homecoming. Chapter 7, Lecture in the Blood Cell. Peter stumbled as the rough hand pushed him past the iron bars. With a grating screech, the hinges swung shut and the lock clacked in place. The White Knight's footsteps echoed through the dungeon hall as he departed. His cell was furnished with a moldy mattress laid out on the hard stone floor and a bucket tipped over in the corner. A tiny windowsill, touching the ceiling, revealed he was only just below ground. "How am I getting myself out of this one?" he sighed. "But first things first." He brought a hand to his chest, breathing deeply. Massaging his ribcage, he carefully brought the bubble he had formed up his esophagus. Holding his breath, the bubble inched up his throat as he opened his mouth wide. It squeezed past his teeth and fell with a splash to the floor. A puddle of blood spread across the stone, collecting in the grout. Unsatisfied, Peter dropped to his knees and plunged his fingers down his throat. He vomited. Blood and bile and bits of pastry splattered into the puddle. Heaving and spitting, Peter did his best to clear his mouth before rolling over to lie face up on the dungeon floor. "What a fucked up little girl," he moaned. Looking up at the ceiling, he winced as a drop of water fell down onto his cheek. With a grunt, he pulled himself up and began scanning the room. "Fee's gonna kill me," he thought as he ran his fingers along the grooves in the stone wall, not knowing what he was looking for. "She's probably sitting in the carriage, pouting about how I always leave her behind." He rattled the iron bars of the cell, but each one was screwed tight. "This isn't my fault. She's the one who wanted to come to Parsol in the first place." He took a running start and scaled the back wall, fingertips gripping the base of the grated window. "If I'm not back soon, she'll end up pulling her ears off out of boredom. Or worse, go wandering off somewhere." Struggling to pull himself up, he could just make out the tall grass leading to the castle's outer wall before his strength gave way and he dropped to the ground. Panting, he didn't notice the puddle of blood stir at the center of the cell. At first, circular ripples formed along the outer edge, coalescing at the puddle's center. Then, it began to bubble, flecks rising up and down as the blood began to beat. Peter's vomit was pushed away as the blood took form, scraping the air as it grew. A misshapen hand with spindly fingers dripped in and out of shape as the puddle clawed its way closer to where he stood. Rearing up, the fingers spread out and tapped the back of Peter's leg. He whipped around and jumped out of his skin. Recoiling against the back wall, he did his very best to press himself through it. Wide-eyed, he stared in horror at the haunting ghost before him, wild thoughts of retribution for throwing up the blood coursing through his mind. His own hands instinctively welled up, but the blood hand remained in place and simply waved before collapsing to the floor, a normal puddle of blood once again. A cackling rasp from beyond the cell snapped Peter's attention. A trail of blood withdrew from the puddle, snaking towards a robed figure tapping a brass ring against the grate. The blood coiled up the iron, writhing around the bar until it reached his gnarled fingers, retreating into his palm. The old man's mustard eyes were fixed on Peter. The grin of his yellowed teeth carved deep the wrinkles across his face. His sallow skin hung loose below his chin, yet constricted like shackles to the bones at his wrists. Wisps of hair, long since removed of color, were combed neatly down his back, covering the queen's sigil on his scarlet robes. "As I live and breathe, look at what we have here." The hoarse croak of the man's voice made the hairs on Peter's arm stand on end. It was not a voice he ever expected to hear again. Never thought I'd see you again, Mr. Prescott. It's Peter, Peter muttered. He pushed himself off the wall, regaining his composure. Didn't think I'd ever come across you again either, Professor Caldwell. Although I guess it's not Professor anymore, is it? No, the old man chuckled. It's just Caldwell now. I take it the Queen has no qualms with your disgusting experiments. Now, every one of those students was a consenting volunteer. It is a shame what happened to that poor boy. Richie, was it? But I did warn him. You were banished from the academy, and your sigil smashed, Peter cried. Bloody academy. Caldwell's face turned sour. They can strip me of my title and oust me from my home, but they can do nothing to take away my gift. I will forever be the Blood Mage. A tear in his palm opened to allow a stream of blood to rise up like a fountain. Peter watched in disgust as blue veins bulged between the wrinkles of his face and all the way down his bony arm. The blood writhed and curved to form a miniature scarlet tree, complete with intricate branches and pinpoint leaves. Behind his revulsion, Peter could not help but be impressed. The artistry alone was incredible, let alone the immense skill behind it. Professor Caldwell had been the foremost authority on creative expression at Laurenti Academy. His classes revolved around understanding the underlying principles of each individual's gift and exploring the diverse possibilities in which they could be applied. He himself demonstrated that his own gift was merely a weak influence over iron, barely capable of pushing a paperclip across his desk. But upon Isaac Talworth's discovery that each hemoglobin protein that made up our red blood cells contained a singular iron atom at the center of each of its subunits, Caldwell began experimenting. It was mere months before he was able to link long chains of red blood cells, and a few years before he had blood hopping from vial to vial. The Academy commended him on his ingenuity and bestowed upon him his moniker. Of course, this was long before it was discovered just how far his experiments had taken him. The tree collapsed back down into Caldwell's palm, his blue veins receding. Peter cringed as the open wound sealed itself shut, the thought of blood still nauseous in his mind. And then it dawned on him. You're the one, he blurted out. That bloody tea party was your doing. Ah, yes, Caldwell admitted. Princess Abigail did show a strange enthusiasm for my gift. I was happy to demonstrate my abilities for her. I became her new flavor of the month, so to speak. Although I will admit, she took it a little further than I had anticipated. You're sick, Peter croaked. Bile formed in his throat as he was reminded of the taste. He forced himself to swallow hard before he spoke again. So what are you doing here? I was informed they were bringing fresh meat to my dungeons, so I came to greet my newest subject, Caldwell replied. Peter shuddered. So you're still at it then? Haven't learned your lesson? On the contrary, my dear boy, I've learned many a lesson. The theories I've proven, the feats I am capable of, they would leave you speechless. You're right, Peter said, backing away. I have no words for you. I'm waiting, Caldwell, a voice called from beyond the stone wall. From his angle, Peter could just make out a pale-skinned arm extending from within the adjacent cell. Apparently, he wasn't the only one imprisoned. Yes, I'll be right with you, Caldwell answered back. He moved over to examine the arm, waiting impatiently. Grabbing the bone-white wrist, he began squeezing gently. The veins in both arms popped as blood flowed from one to the other. After only a few seconds, Caldwell loosened his grip. A soft squelch accompanied the disengagement as the pale arm slunk back into its cell. You don't have to look at me with such contempt, Caldwell spoke to the disapproving eyes at his back. This mage is a willing volunteer, just like the rest. Mage? Peter's curiosity piqued, despite his vow of silence. He walked up to the bars of his cell, craning his neck to try to get a glimpse of his fellow prisoner. He couldn't make out anything except the corner of a vacant mattress. The pasty hand returned to answer his question, holding a crest identical to Peter's own. The silver shield had the same lightning-struck tower, but a different title at its base. The Bone Mage. Bone Mage, Peter read. So what's your power then? I have high calcium, the voice mocked, withdrawing its arm once again. Peter's mind began to churn. With his abilities alone, he couldn't conceive of a way to break out of the cell. But with the help of another? He imagined a man who could take himself apart, bone by bone, and throw himself through the bars. Then a man forming an exoskeleton, capable of smashing through the door itself. Then a man who had no flesh at all, and could simply slip through the bars without any difficulty. But before he could voice any of his suggestions, the prisoner cut him off. Don't get any ideas. I have no interest in leaving my cell. Peter was taken aback. So you mean to rot away in this dungeon forever, forfeiting your own blood? It's better than the alternative, stated the voice. Freedom? Peter offered. A dry laugh accompanied Caldwell's chortling spittle. Peter scowled. He hadn't told a joke. What are you even complaining for? You came to enroll in the Queen's Mage Force, the voice said. Promises of riches, the crown's favor, security for life. You're going to let a few measly days locked in a cell deter you from that? I don't know anything about a mage force, did you say? Peter asked, confused. Surely you just made that up. He did, Caldwell spoke dryly. The Queen's band of mages, headed by myself, is a top-secret group that answers only to Her Majesty. Come on! Mage Force sounds way better than the stupid name you came up with. Band of mages, the voice scoffed. We're not a string quartet. But what does the Queen want mages for? Peter cut in before Caldwell could retort. It's not like the World Council will allow us to join her army, and I highly doubt she's concerned with magical research. You'd be surprised, Caldwell smiled. The Queen is very appreciative of the advancements I have made. And as for our purpose, of course the army is out of the question, at least for the foreseeable future. But that does not mean we cannot act outside the military, in direct opposition to the other kingdoms. Peter's brow furrowed. What is he talking about? A secret mage unit, then, he concluded, hidden from even the council. Precisely, Caldwell confirmed. Let me see. Where should I begin? Tell me what you think you know of the Hallow Stream. Peter exhaled. Caldwell was testing his patience. The smug look on the old man's face brought him back to his lectures at Laurenti. Only Peter was no longer a first-year acolyte, and Caldwell was no longer his professor. The Hallow Stream is the source of our powers, Peter said, humoring the old man. It passes once and only once through every mage, altering our very composition, and carries on its way. A golden wind, manifesting throughout the world in bits and pieces. It is fleeting, random, and rare. Not quite the textbook definition, but close enough, Caldwell grated. The stream is evolution incarnate, an intangible, unrelenting force of change, with a will of its own, unbound by the fancies of man. The great God himself stepped away from our race, repulsed by our frivolous follies, but in his infinite wisdom left us the Hallow Stream in his stead, in order to enact his vision. It chooses what we become, it learns from what it finds, and it constantly adapts its understanding of how the world functions. His eyes were alight with fervor. Imagine, then, if we were able to capture it for ourselves. Impossible. Peter shook his head. Countless mages have tried, their failed efforts recorded extensively in the annals. No one has even come close. You cannot grab hold of that without form, he recited, this time exactly from the text. What if I told you of a container that could hold it for me? Caldwell lowered his voice, speaking with great reverence. A vessel
crafted centuries ago, capable of holding a portion of the stream, larger than you could even fathom, locked away all this time.
I'd say you were full of it. Peter rolled his eyes. Only a fool would believe in such nonsense.
Then I guess King Raphael is a fool, then,
Caldwell mused. Peter paused. He did not see how the King of Bartai could possibly have anything to do with this hypothetical discussion, but he was slowly putting the pieces together. If Caldwell was suggesting what he thought he was, then the old man was more insane than Peter had given him credit for.
You're mad.
Peter's voice rose with incredulity. You think Bartai is hiding this fantastical power? You plan to invade the Northern Kingdom with this mage force of yours and steal this imaginary vessel from the king himself? You're going to start a war.
I'm going to end a false veil of peace, Caldwell countered. You think a war with no victor truly ends? Bah! Each party only retreats and waits until their opponent believes peace has fallen. So what if it's been nearly a century since the last mage war ended? That only means the plots have had ample time to thicken.
You can't use mages to invade a kingdom, Peter insisted. There's a reason it was called the last mage war. After that monumental massacre, the council was forced to step in and put an end to it. They resolutely decreed that mages were forbidden from participating in inter-kingdom conflicts. Signed by all 4 nations, we're beholden to the world law same as the rest of them. If your plot is found out, the other kingdoms will band together with the full support of the council and raze Perona to the ground.
You believe that's why the war was put to an end, Caldwell mocked. Allow me to enlighten you, you poor, naive young man. The council cared not for the introduction of mages into battle. Magic at the time was still a rudimentary exercise, a pitiful echo of what it has become. Even the 4 pillars, leading their nations in unparalleled conquest, were of little concern to the world at large. No, what frightened the council more than any mere mage was the threat of utter annihilation. It was a threat from one of the kingdoms, that if they did not put an end to the war, then said kingdom would be forced to do so for them.
There's no record of that, Peter said in disbelief.
Obviously. You think the council would want word of the vessel easily accessible for all to read?
And that's your basis for infiltrating Bartai? That's why you think they hold this power? You'd risk the sake of our nation on this theory of yours?
Caldwell shrugged. I admit, this is simply conjecture, of course. Ultimately, it will be the Queen herself to make the decision whether we must investigate. But you can be sure I will be heading the investigation myself.
So what do you say? Peter, was it? The voice had patiently waited for them to finish. You going to join our little group? Don't leave me alone with this old coot.
We'd be very pleased to have you, Peter, Caldwell added. Naturally, participation in my band comes with certain prerequisites.
He reached forward expectantly.
I wouldn't want any of my mages stepping out of line.
Peter crossed his arms in disbelief.
You've got a hope in hell of taking my blood. I'm afraid it's non-negotiable, Caldwell responded, hand still outstretched.
Then you'll have to come in here and pry it from my cold, dead arm. Peter spat. Caldwell's grin extended past human limits. Peter could see every one of his 32 time-worn teeth. His tongue wormed out, slavering his chapped lips.
Foolish child. You and I both know that if I was so inclined, I'd have you pinned to the wall and drained of every last milliliter you possess.
Try it, Peter challenged. He shifted his stance, liquid palms up. He was ready for a fight. Caldwell rustled through his robes and procured a small ring of keys. Methodically, he flipped through them one by one until he found a long copper key missing a few teeth. He jammed it into the lock and pushed the door open. Creaking as it swung, it rattled against the iron bars and came to a stop. Peter held his breath.
You're free to go, Mr. Prescott, Caldwell sighed.
Peter's arms dropped, liquid dripping uselessly to the floor. Plots of surprising the blood mage and escaping during the fight were rendered unnecessary. Cautiously, he took a single step forward. You're just setting me free?
Caldwell clicked his tongue. I have no use for anyone that isn't completely on board with my operation. I cannot risk having an unruly child such as yourself jeopardizing my mission.
Is it a trap? Peter thought. Was Caldwell waiting to catch him unawares outside his cell? It was true that in a straight-up fight he probably stood little chance of coming out on top, but if he were to walk right into his arms, that chance would be reduced to 0. It's not like I have any other options, he decided, leaving the cell.
It is unfortunate, Caldwell sighed. I believed you, of all people, would jump at the chance to grasp eternal power. Perhaps it would grant you the opportunity to repair your heinous blunder.
Caldwell wasn't prepared. Peter grabbed him with 2 hands and flung him against the wall. The old man's head snapped forward as it recoiled against the slick surface. Peter's senses fought to hold back his rage as he brought his face right up to the old man's. Logic pleaded to put him down, but all he wanted to do was knock him sideways.
Temper, boy,
Caldwell whispered. A coil of blood tapped at the back of Peter's neck. Flowing from Caldwell's palm, it snaked up to a spiked point, hovering above his spine.
Let's not blame others for our own faults.
He let go. Closing his eyes, he took a few short breaths. Reckless and idiotic, he berated himself. What was the plan there? Have I become Fee? Don't you ever speak of her, he muttered.
Or you'll do what?
Caldwell sneered. Just what Peter would do, he was spared from explaining, as the dungeon door heaved forward at that moment. Shackles jangled from their nails as the wooden planks of the door shuddered. Ducking low to fit through the frame, the White Knight had returned. As he elevated to his full height, Peter took a step back, prepared for another battle. But his spirits fell upon spotting Fee following just behind. For heaven's sakes, you got caught too, he started, but the little girl pushed past the knight to snap back. Wait here, Fee. I'll be back soon, Fee. Trust me, Fee. I've always got a plan in my pocket. Fee stormed right up to Peter, jabbing a finger into his chest. And now I'm here breaking you out of prison. I do always have a plan, Peter fought back, completely ignoring the room full of enemies. You didn't need to come down here with high hopes of rescuing me. I was perfectly fine getting out by myself. He indicated the cell door left ajar. Caldwell snorted. Made a friend, have we? Fee shot a brief glance at the old man. I bet you had to beg and plead again for him to let you out of your cage. And you? Peter looked up at the White Knight, lording over all, bewildered as to why he was helping her. What could you have possibly done to win this guy over? Don't you worry about it. Just say thank you, Fee answered.
It will be in your best interest to leave now,
the White Knight said. He speaks? Peter was caught off guard. Of course he speaks. Fee shook her head at his stupidity. He's not a doll. Come on, let's go. Fee turned to leave, pulling at Peter's cloak. He stumbled forward, dragged by the strength of the little girl, but grabbed her wrist to stop her. Give me a minute. Turning back, Peter strode past Caldwell and stood before the next cell over. With one hand on the bars, he peered into the cell at the man huddled in the back corner. Knees balled up, arms crossed with his head buried between them, the man's white blonde hair stuck out in odd clumps. His clothing was in tatters, the hem of his pants fraying, and his plain white shirt riddled with holes. Cobwebs clung to his knees and shoulders, as if he hadn't left the spot in weeks. Damn, you look bad, man. You sure you don't want out of this hellhole? Peter offered, sympathy plain in his tone. The man raised his head. He was young, about Peter's age. His eyes were glazed over, lost in a world of his own. His face was shockingly pale, and his gaunt cheeks made Peter question whether he had eaten in days. At his concern, the man smiled, and Peter was surprised to find a perfect set of pearly whites. "Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. You'll end up worse than me before you know it. I guarantee it, mate." His chipper tone made Peter question his sanity. "You going to at least tell me your name before I go?" Peter asked. "It's not often you find a fellow mage in the wild." The man tilted his head at an unnatural 45-degree angle, sending a shiver down Peter's spine. "Next time, perhaps," he said. "I'd prefer to introduce myself when I get a chance to look down on you. Good luck, Peter, until we meet again, which I hope will be a long while for your sake." The man returned his head to the solidarity of his lap. Peter lingered a moment before turning to leave. "Can't say I didn't try," he thought. "Don't let him die," Peter warned the blood mage as he passed.
"Of course not," Caldwell obliged. "He still has value to me."
Fee clicked her tongue impatiently. "Now can we leave?" Peter regarded the White Knight waiting patiently at the door. Once again, he found himself relying on an enemy, and once again, he had no choice in the matter. "At least this time I can blame Fee if we end up getting killed," he thought. "Yeah, sure," Peter answered. "Let's go." The citizens marveled at the Colossus marching through their streets. Mouths agape, they opened their windows and hurried out of shops to catch a glimpse of the White Knight as he passed by. Indeed, it was a rare sight to see the Queen's left hand walking the streets of Parsal. Usually, the knight would be cooped up in the royal carriage, accompanying the Queen on her many excursions beyond the city walls. But today, he was alone and on foot. Gutter children chased after the large man, hollering for him to draw his sword and show them the fabled soul heart. The White Knights simply pressed on. They tried their utmost to keep pace, but they were no match for his long, effortless strides. "You hit her?" Peter asked incredulous, panting as he struggled to keep up. "Yes, for the third time I hit her," Fee explained, skipping along beside him, words flying faster than she was. "And then the big black guy jumped at me, and I didn't believe he could jump, so I froze. But then the White Knight comes out of nowhere, and obviously he's just as big, so he blocks the attack with his sword. His sword! It glows! It was so cool! And he knocked the Black Knight away, and he talked with me, and he was the only reasonable man in the whole castle, so I made him promise to save us, and then we came to get you." "I can't believe you hit the princess," was all Peter could say. "She had it coming," Fee shrugged. "And what about Jack?" Fee rolled her eyes. "He was useless. No help at all. Although, he did hint that Charlie here would escort us out of the city. So I guess there's that." "Charlie." Peter could only shake his head. "Hang on." Fee halted to a stop, a sour look on her face. "What?" Peter asked, thankful for the chance to catch his breath, but nervously glancing forward as the White Knight carried on without them. "You didn't end up showing me where you live." "What?" "Your home. That was the whole reason we came here in the first place." "I had no intention of visiting my home," Peter muttered. "Yeah, but I did. I wanted to walk down your street, see what your room was like, meet your—"
"Come on, you two,"
the White Knight called from far ahead. He rounded a corner, disappearing from view. Peter started after him. "Yeah, well, seeing as you've made us enemies of the crown, I think our sightseeing window has ended." "I guess," Fee pouted. "Come on, I'll race you to Charlie," he offered, trying to lift her spirits, and took off down the road. They had left the castle through its northern entrance, and had been following the knight for several blocks. They hadn't quite hit the peasants' quarters, but the lavish homes of Parsal's more affluent members were far behind. Fee dashed ahead after the knight, darting around a group of men smoking cigars in the setting sun. Turning around mid-stride, she jeered. "You're going to get left behind." Peter shook his head. "It's not like I don't know where we're going," he thought, but did his best to catch up nonetheless. As he rounded the corner, he caught his steps before a densely packed crowd. Fee was on the floor, rubbing her rear. A plump woman had turned about and was eyeing her with revulsion. It was clear that Fee had run straight into her.
Watch where you're going, you gutter wench! The woman spat.
Sorry, Fee's apology caught in her throat as a shrill whistle cut through the air.
Back now, I say! Off the tracks, off the tracks! There's plenty of room for all.
A little man wearing a maroon top hat and matching tailed suit was ushering people at the front of the crowd to step away from the platform he alone was apparently allowed to stand upon. They stepped back, jostling those waiting behind, as disgruntled men pushed back in greater numbers. The open square had empty flanks at either end, paved with clean cobblestone, but those sections were roped off, with the crowd centered in the middle. The White Knight stood to the left of the masses, beckoning the attendant on the platform towards him. The little man rushed forward past a wrought iron pole, removing his hat out of respect, and began talking animatedly with the knight. The pole carried a large round-faced clock, dark blue markings stark against its yellow background. The clock struck 7 as the sun dipped below the city's northern wall in the distance. Peter helped Fee up, holding back a smile. The girl rarely admitted her fault, and he wasn't about to ridicule her when she did. Instead, he brushed the dirt off her shoulders and pointed at the cloud of billowing smoke to the west, rushing towards them. It was only then that Fee noticed a line of metal rails along the ground, disappearing towards the source of the smoke. She got up on her toes, trying to see over the crowd, when the whistle blew again. Wincing, she grabbed her ears and folded them down, but her guard couldn't block the rhythmic churning of heavy metal gears. The sound seemed to travel beneath the ground through her feet, as well as through the air. She was berated by the screeching whine of scraping metal, and felt the gust of wind in her face before she saw the mechanical behemoth pulling into the station. The locomotive shrieked as it slowed towards the platform, sparks flying where the brakes clutched the rails. The pistons ceased their cycle, locking the spoked wheels in place as the train came to a stop before the platform. The boiler cart exhaled, relieving itself of a great deal of pressure, and spraying the front of the crowd with a gush of warm mist. The magnificent train was like nothing Fee had ever seen before. She was entranced by its menacing black chimney and the gleam off the smoke box's copper surface. She couldn't fathom how it would be able to carry away this massive crowd of people. 8 passenger boxes were hitched in line to the lead engine. Each had a newly applied coat of sky blue paint glazed over a layer of rust, evidenced by the chipping edges. Across the boxes, in bold gold lettering, the name Darius was on full display.
Why has the D train come? It isn't supposed to arrive until 8,
the attendant moaned, checking the round-faced clock as he gripped his top hat.
Change of schedule.
The conductor leaned his head out the window and lit his pipe for a smoke.
The H train needed a tune-up at Fell's Bridge, so they sent us on ahead.
You could have sent word, the attendant muttered, plucking at his maroon suit. The doors of the lead and rear compartments flew open. Men came streaming out, populating the deserted wings of the open square, heading home to their wives and children after a hard day of working the fields in the neighboring villages. If they were surprised to see the White Knight awaiting them, they did not show it. They dragged their beleaguered feet past, longing for the warm comfort of home. The White Knight himself was looking towards Peter and Fee, gesturing with his gloved hand for them to approach. Come on, your pal wants us over there. Peter nudged his companion, who was still wide-eyed with astonishment. With a chuckle, he pulled her along, ducking under the rope to cut in front of the boisterous crowd waiting to board. A few men dared to complain as they passed, but a quick glance towards their destination shut them up real quick. The little attendant was waiting by the open door of the rear cart, rotating his top hat in his hands, eyeing the passengers with such clout so as to require a royal escort. Thanks. I think we'll manage from here. Peter looked up at the White Knight. Unless, of course, you planned on sitting with us as well. The White Knight remained silent. Peter smiled a toothy grin back at his expressionless face, and stepped up onto the train. Fee looked up to the White Knight as well, tracing his deep wrinkles with her eyes. His weathered face seemed saddened by time. Thank you for keeping your word, she said. This time, he elected to respond. This train is headed towards the Laurentine Mage Academy. I'm sure you will be welcome there. But we're not, Fee began. Yes, that's fine, Peter cut her off, sticking his head out a window, having already taken his seat. Fee passed the White Knight and stepped onto the train. Thinking for a moment, she turned back to the knight and said earnestly, "I'm sorry for attacking your princess. I hope you don't get into trouble for it."
On the contrary,
The White Knight smiled for the first time.
it was the only way for you to leave the castle alive. You would be sorry if you hadn't.
Fee reflected on that for a moment, but the White Knight was not done.
Our deal has concluded, but I'll leave you with this advice of my own accord. Never return to this city. You are no longer welcome in Parsol. If word reaches me of your presence, I will personally hunt you down and kill you myself. You have been warned.
He removed his bloodied glove and let it fall to the floor. The wrinkles on his face had not yet reached his calloused hand, as he clenched his fingers into a strong fist and uncurled them slowly. His blue eyes found Fee's as he extended his arm towards her. Atop the raised steps of the train, she could almost reach his chin. Taking his large hand in her little one, they shook one last time, ending their agreement. And with that, the White Knight strode off, his ivory cloak trailing behind him. Fee watched until he disappeared, then went to take her seat beside Peter. Thanks for listening. A new chapter will be made available for free each week until the 10-chapter volume is finished. Or, if you're excited to read more, you can purchase the complete audiobook over at Audible right now, or the full ebook from Amazon, Kobo, and more. You could also support me via a direct donation at paypal.me/peterandfee, or most importantly, by subscribing to my Patreon over at patreon.com/peterandfee. My patrons will receive both the full ebook and audiobook on day one of their release, as well as exclusive behind-the-scenes insight episodes I create for each chapter. Furthermore, they will get first access to all my content and many other perks exclusive to them. I produce Peter and Fee entirely independently, so I would really appreciate your support in whichever way you prefer. If not, no worries. Please continue to enjoy the adventures, and hopefully, I'll be able to keep creating them for you. Next time, Chapter 8, Birds of a Feather. Available Thursday, February 14th, 2019.